It is also my pleasure to introduce Senator Mitch McConnell this morning. Senator McConnell was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 1984. He is serving his 5th term as Senator from Kentucky. He serves as Republican leader in the Senate and serves on the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forest Committee, the Committee on Appropriations, and the Rules and Administration Committee. Senator McConnell is a recipient of the Distinguished Service to Agriculture Award, Farm Bureau's highest honor bestowed by the American Farm Bureau, as well as Friend of Farm Bureau Award to each Congress he has served. We're pleased to have with us this morning from his staff, we have Eric King, we have Blake Dealey. Would you stand, please, both of those? And I thought I saw Neil Chatterjee come in the room a while ago. Yes, thank you, Neil, for coming here. Also would like to just take just a moment to express on behalf of our organization, Senator, to you for the work that you did and what time you gave. If you were watching TV, you saw this. Over the Christmas holiday, over the New Year holiday, you gave of your time to make a difference on tax issues that really affect our organization. I think that permanent tax structure that was put in place will save family farms and small businesses for many years to come in Kentucky. For that, we want to say thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Mark was referring to how I spent my New Year's Eve. Whatever you were doing, you were having more fun than I was. Imagine having to spend the New Year's Eve with Joe Biden. As a fellow who just got a 100% rating from the American Conservative Union, some of you may be asking, why were you spending New Year's Eve with Joe Biden? I think that's a good question. Let me tell you why. Frequently, Congress will pass legislation and it has a sunset date. In other words, it comes to an end. And on many things, that's a good idea. You ought not to make things permanent that you're concerned about. But in the case of the tax relief that was granted 12 years ago, back in 2001, we would love to have been able to get permanency. The difference between a sunset and a permanent law means that if it's permanent law, the only way you change it is go through the whole process. Has to pass the House, has to pass the Senate, has to be signed by the President. Harder to do, to change permanent law. A lot harder to change permanent law than to change something that's going to come to an end, bam, and it's over. We were never able, our side, the Republican side, to make the so-called Bush tax cuts permanent because we could never get to 60 votes in the Senate, which is what it would have taken to get permanent law. So we ended up doing it in pieces over a 12-year period. And the last piece came to an end December 31st, 2012. So here's the situation. We had no leverage at all because the President, as you know, had campaigned on raising taxes on a whole lot of people and trying to get as much revenue as he could. And our members of the House can certify that whatever the efforts that the Speaker made to try to reach some kind of agreement with the President were unsuccessful. And so I found myself in a meeting in the Oval Office on December the 28th. Now, to show you how unusual that is, the Congress hadn't been in session between Christmas and New Year's since 1970. I haven't looked up what was going on in 1970. But it must have been a pretty big deal, Hal, because they were here. We hadn't been here during that week and all of those years since. But here we were in the Oval Office. I was sitting there with the Speaker and Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, and the Speaker repeated what he had said publicly before. It was no secret, that the House was not going to be able to act. So the President turned to Harry Reid and myself and said, maybe you guys ought to talk. And we said, okay, we will. So we went back to the office and started talking. To make a long story short, it led to nothing. And on Sunday afternoon, Senate in session, Sunday afternoon, I went to the floor of the Senate and I said, I'm looking for a dance partner. And I called the vice president, with whom I had been able to work on some other matters that we had been able to reach an agreement on, and we ended up in a series of discussions back and forth that went on from 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday until 12:45 in the morning. We thought we'd reached an agreement. And we talked again at 6:45 on New Year's Eve. There was a snag. It took us through the day to get the snag worked out. And at midnight, technically everybody's taxes went up. At 2 a.m., the Senate passed a version that Mark referred to that I felt strongly, and most of my members felt, was the best deal you could get in a situation where you had no leverage, because the sunset gave all the leverage to the president, who wanted to raise as many taxes as he could. And so here was the deal. For people making $400,000 a year, or $450,000 for a couple, no change in the tax rate. That's 99% of Kentuckians. Capital gains, above the 400 and 450, 20%, below it 15%, dividends the same. 20% above that threshold, 15% below. And most important, from my point of view, because I had worked very hard, and we had talked about this in various meetings we've had over the last 2 years, to try to get an estate tax exemption that would save virtually every family farm and small business in Kentucky. And the widely agreed upon threshold that would achieve that was $5 million per person. And that's what Mark was referring to, per person. So we got the $5 million per person exemption, and all of this is permanent law. Now, that doesn't mean it can't ever be changed, but that means it can't be changed because you ran out of time. There's no sunset on something with permanent law. Further, all of these are indexed to inflation. Further, as I pointed out to you and other groups over the last 2 years, you don't have to die to take advantage of it. You can use that, in effect, $5 million tax-free gift now, if you want to. If you want to begin to get your family farm or your small business down to the next generation, you can do it. So I thought, given the fact that the president run on raising taxes, given the fact that Republicans controlled one-third of the government, it was a deal that was good for America. And this has been an administration with which, frankly, for most of us, it's been hard to deal. The president is pretty far left of center, and you're going to see, Rand, I think, referred to it, and I'll talk about it more in our meeting with you this afternoon, an effort that we're engaged in now to try to reduce government spending. We now have a debt the size of our economy. $16 trillion economy, $16 trillion debt. When you've got a debt the size of your economy, you look a lot like Greece. Not some other day, but right now. Washington has been on a spending spree over the last 4 years. We've had a $1 trillion deficit each year for the last 4 years. We've added $6.5 trillion to the national debt. And you probably get tired of all these figures thrown around and try to put them in context. So the way to put it in context is, when you have a debt the size of your economy, you look a lot like Greece. That's what that means. And so we are struggling here to try to get this spending machine in the White House to reduce spending. The sequester that you'll hear a lot about will not be insignificant if it is achieved. And my view is it ought to be achieved one way or the other. We promised the American people a year and a half ago that we would reduce discretionary spending this year by that amount of money. Now, I agree with the president, it isn't the best way to do it, but frankly, the sequester was his idea. It was his idea. We'd be happy to talk to him about achieving exactly the same amount of spending reduction in another way. For myself, I'd be happy to give him the flexibility to direct his agencies to do it in the least harmful way to the country. But let's put this all in perspective. This is a 2.4% spending reduction over the next 6 months. You know how much we're spending this year? $3.6 trillion. I'll bet you that most of you could reduce your farming operations by 2.5% and somehow survive. I just bet you could. I just bet you might not even have much of an impact on your standard of living. That's what we're talking about, 2.4% out of $3.6 trillion. Put another way, the amount of money we would save over the next 6 months is about how much your government will borrow this month. If we can't achieve this, we can't cut anything. And so I just wanted to put the so-called sequester. You've seen the president, he's trotting out people that are going to try to scare the country into thinking Armageddon is at hand. This is not Armageddon. This is an effort to begin to save this country for your children and your grandchildren, because we're leaving behind for them a mountain of debt. So we'll have a chance to discuss all of these issues and immigration and other things that you're concerned about this afternoon. Mark, thank you for your kind words about the death tax exemption. I did feel really good about that. I think it was an important achievement for our state and for our nation. And I thank you all for your friendship and support over the years, and I look forward to seeing you this afternoon. Thanks a lot.